An arrogant billionaire, terminally ill and hopeless, mocks a poor 12-year-old girl who approaches him with calm, determined eyes. "If you cure me, I'll give you 1 million, he scoffs. She softly replies, "I don't want your money. I just wish I had a father." That night, he miraculously wakes up healed, but shaken by her words, haunted. He begins searching for the mysterious child and uncovers fragments of a forgotten past. With each clue, the impossible starts to make sense, until the truth shatters him completely. The little girl didn't just heal him. She is his daughter, missing for nearly a decade. A story of reunion, forgiveness, and the kind of healing money could never buy. Please hit that like button if you want more heartwarming stories like this one, and comment which part touched your heart the most. Let's start this incredible journey together. Marcus Blackwood had always believed money could buy anything. At 52, he had built a financial empire worth $8 billion. Marriages, friendships, even love, everything had its price in the cruel philosophy that governed his existence. But now, lying in the bed of New York's most expensive hospital, he was discovering there was one thing all his fortune couldn't purchase: more time. "Mr. Blackwood, the results are conclusive," Dr. Patricia Stevens said, her voice carefully controlled. She had delivered this kind of news countless times, but facing one of the most powerful men in America made her hands tremble slightly. "The pancreatic cancer has metastasized. Even with the most aggressive treatment, we're looking at perhaps 3 to 6 months." Marcus stared at the ceiling, his jaw clenched. The irony wasn't lost on him. He who had crushed so many dreams, who had built his fortune on the misery of others, was now facing his own mortality. "How much?" he asked coldly. "Excuse me?" Dr. Stevens blinked, confused. "How much to buy me another year? 5 years? Name your price. I'll fund an entire research wing if necessary." His voice carried the same ruthless authority that had terrified Wall Street for decades. The doctor shook her head sadly. "Mr. Blackwood, some things simply cannot be bought. Your body is shutting down. The best we can do is make you comfortable and—" "Get out!" The words came out as a growl. "Get out and send me someone who understands that everything has a price." As Dr. Stevens left, Marcus turned toward the massive windows overlooking Central Park. Snow was beginning to fall, covering the world in pristine white, a beauty he had never taken time to notice in all his years of ruthless ambition. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Blackwood felt something he had never experienced: complete helplessness. The private suite, costing $15,000 a day, felt like a luxurious prison. Golden fixtures, marble floors, and a view that millionaires would kill for, yet none of it could change the death sentence growing inside his body. His empire, his power, his carefully constructed image of invincibility, all of it was crumbling like sand through his fingers. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from board members, investors, and his legal team. Everyone wanted to know about succession plans, about the future of Blackwood Industries. But Marcus ignored them all, let them panic, let his stock price fluctuate. For once in his life, he had bigger concerns than money. As evening approached, Marcus found himself thinking about his past, something he had trained himself never to do. Memories were weakness, sentiment was for fools. But facing death had a way of breaking down even the strongest walls. Images flickered through his mind: a young woman with kind eyes, a small apartment filled with laughter. Dreams that didn't involve crushing competitors or accumulating wealth. But those memories belonged to a different man, a man who had died long before cancer ever entered the picture. The next morning brought a parade of specialists, each more expensive than the last. They spoke in medical jargon, presented treatment options that would cost millions and offered false hope wrapped in statistical probabilities. Marcus listened with growing frustration, his patience wearing thinner with each consultation. Experimental treatment in Switzerland, suggested Dr. Rodriguez, the third oncologist that day. 70% success rate in early trials. The cost would be approximately $2 million, plus, book it, Marcus interrupted. Money was just numbers on a screen to him now. Mr. Blackwood, I should mention that the treatment is quite rigorous. The survival rate for patients in your condition is actually closer to 15%. And the side effects can be, I said book it. Marcus's voice carried the finality that had closed billion-dollar deals. But as the specialists filed out, discussing logistics and paperwork, Marcus caught a glimpse of something through his window that made him pause. In the small garden area below, barely visible through the falling snow, a small figure sat alone on a bench. Even from 12 floors up, he could see it was a child, a little girl bundled in a worn coat, sitting perfectly still despite the bitter cold. Something about her solitary presence irritated him. Children shouldn't be allowed in the hospital gardens. This was a place for serious medical business, not a playground for vagrant kids who had wandered in off the street. He pressed the call button for his private nurse. There's a child in the garden. Have security remove her immediately. The nurse, a middle-aged woman named Janet, who had been treating wealthy patients for 20 years, glanced out the window. Oh, that's little Rosemarie. She comes here sometimes. Sweet child, lost her mother recently and her grandmother is getting treatment in the charity ward. I don't care about her sob story, Marcus snapped. This is a medical facility, not a daycare center. Get rid of her. Janet's expression hardened slightly. She had seen enough wealthy patients to recognize entitlement. But something about Marcus's cruelty toward a grieving child struck her as particularly callous. Sir, she's not bothering anyone. She just sits quietly and... Are you deaf? I want her gone. Now. As Janet reluctantly left to contact security, Marcus returned to the window. The girl hadn't moved. Snow was accumulating on her shoulders and hair. Yet she remained motionless, as if she were part of the landscape itself. Something about her stillness unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. His phone rang, his assistant with updates about the Swiss clinic arrangements. As he spoke, making demands and issuing orders, he found his eyes drifting back to the garden. But when he looked again, the bench was empty. The girl had vanished as silently as she had appeared, leaving only a small depression in the snow where she'd been sitting. That night, Marcus's condition worsened. The pain medication that had been managing his symptoms seemed less effective, and waves of nausea left him weak and disoriented. Doctor. Stevens ordered additional tests, her expression growing more concerned with each result. Your condition is progressing faster than we anticipated, she admitted quietly. The Swiss treatment may not be an option if we wait much longer. But Marcus barely heard her. As he drifted in and out of consciousness, his dreams were filled with strange images. The motionless girl in the garden, snowflakes that felt like tears, and a voice, so soft he might have imagined it, whispering words he couldn't quite understand. 3 days passed in a blur of medical consultations, legal documents, and increasing pain. Marcus's body was betraying him with alarming speed, and even his iron will couldn't prevent the physical decline. The Swiss clinic had agreed to accept him, but his condition was deteriorating so rapidly that the doctors were beginning to express doubts about his ability to survive the journey. It was during one of these dark moments, as Marcus lay in a morphine-induced haze, that he heard it again, that same soft voice from his dreams. But this time he was certain he wasn't sleeping. "Excuse me, sir." Marcus forced his eyes open, expecting to see a nurse or doctor. Instead, standing beside his bed was the same little girl he had seen in the garden, up close, She was even smaller than he had imagined, perhaps 12 years old, with long brown hair and the largest, most serious eyes he had ever seen. Her clothes were clean, but clearly second-hand, and she carried herself with a dignity that seemed far beyond her years. "How did you get in here?" Marcus's voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. His private suite required special keycards, and security was supposed to be impenetrable. "I asked the nice lady at the desk if I could visit you," Rosemary said simply. "She said you were very sick and probably lonely." "Get out!" Marcus tried to summon his usual authority, but the words came out weak and pathetic. "This is a private room. You're not supposed to be here." Instead of leaving, Rosemary moved closer to his bed. Her eyes seemed to look right through him, seeing something that made him profoundly uncomfortable. "You're in a lot of pain," she said. It wasn't a question. "That's none of your business, kid. Now get lost before I call security." But Rosemary didn't move. She continued to study him with those unnaturally mature eyes, as if she were reading a book written in a language only she understood. "My mama used to hurt like you do," she said quietly, "before she went to heaven." Despite himself, Marcus found his anger wavering. There was something about this child's presence that was both infuriating and oddly comforting. "Where are your parents?" he asked, though he wasn't sure why. "Mama died 6 months ago. Cancer, like you have." Rosemary's voice remained steady, but Marcus caught a flicker of sadness in her eyes. "And my daddy." She paused, looking down at her small hands. "I don't know where my daddy is. Mama said he had to go away before I was born." Marcus felt an unexpected pang of something, sympathy, regret. He pushed the feeling away. "Well, that's very sad, but it's not my problem. You shouldn't be bothering sick people." "I'm not bothering you," Rosemary said with surprising confidence. "I'm here to help." "Help?" Marcus almost laughed, but it came out as a bitter cough. "Kid, I've got teams of the best doctors in the world trying to help me. What exactly do you think you can do that they can't?" Rosemary stepped even closer, and Marcus noticed something strange. The constant pain that had been his companion for weeks seemed to lessen slightly in her presence. The effect was so subtle he almost convinced himself he was imagining it. "Sometimes healing isn't about medicine," she said, her voice carrying a wisdom that seemed impossible for someone so young. "Sometimes people are sick in ways that doctors can't fix." Before Marcus could respond, Rosemary reached out and gently placed her small hand on his forehead. The moment her skin touched his, something extraordinary happened. The pain that had been eating him alive for months simply disappeared, not gradually, not partially, but completely and instantly. Marcus gasped, his eyes widening in shock. For the first time in weeks, he could breathe without agony. His mind, which had been clouded by pain medication and disease, suddenly felt clear and sharp. "What did you just do?" he whispered, staring at the little girl in amazement and terror. Rosemary smiled for the first time since entering his room, a sad, beautiful expression that broke something deep inside Marcus's chest. "I just helped a little," she said softly. Marcus lay in stunned silence, his hand instinctively moving to where the pain had been just moments before. Nothing. For the first time in months, his body felt normal, strong even. The crushing weight that had been slowly killing him was simply gone, as if it had never existed. "This is impossible," he breathed, sitting up in bed without the excruciating effort it had required for weeks. "What are you? How did you—" But when he looked around, Rosemary was gone. The room was empty except for him, and if not for the lingering warmth where her hand had touched his forehead, he might have convinced himself the entire encounter had been a hallucination. Marcus swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood up. His legs, which had been weak and shaky for weeks, now supported him easily. He walked to the bathroom mirror and stared at his reflection. The gaunt, grey-skinned man, who had been staring back at him for months, was gone. His face had colour again, his eyes were bright and alert, and he looked healthy. "This can't be real," he muttered, but even as he spoke he knew it was. He knew it. Whatever that strange little girl had done to him, it had worked in a way that defied every law of medicine and science he knew. He pressed the call button urgently. When Janet appeared, her reaction confirmed what he already knew. "Mr. Blackwood!" she gasped, staring at him in shock. You're standing! You look!" She struggled for words. "I feel fine," Marcus said, and realized it was true. "Better than fine. I want Dr. Stevens in here immediately. I want every test run again, right now." The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of medical examinations, X-rays, blood tests, CT scans, MRIs. Every possible diagnostic tool was employed. The medical team grew increasingly bewildered as each test came back normal, not improved, completely normal, as if Marcus had never been sick at all. "I don't understand it," Dr. Stevens admitted, staring at the test results with a mixture of wonder and professional confusion. "Your cancer markers are undetectable. The tumors we saw just yesterday are completely gone. In 30 years of practice, I've never seen anything like this." "Spontaneous remission?" suggested Dr. Rodriguez, though his voice carried no conviction. "Not like this. Not this complete, and certainly not this fast." Dr. Stevens shook her head. "Mr. Blackwood, I need to ask, have you been taking any experimental medications, undergone any treatments we're not aware of?" Marcus almost told them about Rosemarie, but stopped himself. How could he explain what he didn't understand himself? That a 12-year-old girl had cured terminal cancer with a touch. They'd think he had lost his mind. "No," he said simply, "nothing." As the medical team continued their baffled discussions, Marcus found himself thinking about the girl. Who was she? Where had she come from? And more importantly, where had she gone? He called for Janet. "That child who was here earlier, Rosemarie, you said her grandmother is in the charity ward?" "Yes, sir. Room 247. Mrs. Elena Martinez. She's been battling lung cancer for about 8 months now." Janet paused, studying Marcus's face. "Why do you ask?" "I want to speak with her, both of them." Janet looked surprised. "Sir, visiting the charity ward isn't." "Well, it's not something our private patients usually—" "I don't care about protocol," Marcus interrupted. "Make it happen." An hour later, Marcus found himself in an elevator descending to the 6th floor, a part of the hospital he had never seen and never thought about. The charity ward was a different world from his luxurious penthouse suite. The hallways were narrow, the walls painted institutional green, and the smell of disinfectant couldn't quite mask the underlying odors of sickness and despair. Room 247 was a shared space with 4 beds, separated by thin curtains that provided minimal privacy. In the bed by the window, a frail Hispanic woman in her 70s lay connected to various machines. Her breathing was labored, and her skin had the grey pallor Marcus recognized from his own reflection just hours earlier. Beside her bed, holding her hand, sat Rosemarie. The little girl looked up as Marcus approached, showing no surprise at seeing him. It was as if she had been expecting him. "Hello again," Rosemarie said quietly, her voice barely audible over the humming of the medical equipment. The woman in the bed, Elena Martinez, opened her eyes at the sound of voices. When she saw Marcus, confusion flickered across her weathered features. She spoke in rapid Spanish to Rosemarie, who responded in the same language. "My abuela wants to know who you are," Rosemarie translated. "I told her you're the man from upstairs who was very sick." "Was," Elena repeated in heavily accented English, studying Marcus with sharp eyes despite her illness. "You look healthy now." Marcus pulled up a chair, feeling awkward and out of place in this cramped, underfunded room. He had spent his entire life avoiding places like this, dismissing the suffering of people who couldn't afford better. Now, sitting beside this dying woman and her granddaughter, he felt the weight of his own callousness. "Your granddaughter," he began, then stopped. How could he possibly explain what had happened? "She helped me today." Eleanor's eyes moved between Marcus and Rosemary, and something passed between the two females, some understanding that Marcus wasn't privy to. "Rosemary has special hands," Eleanor said carefully. "Since she was very small, she could ease pain, make hurt go away sometimes." "But not for you?" Marcus asked, noting the woman's obvious suffering. Elena smiled sadly. "God decides when it is time. Rosemary, she knows this too. She can help, yes, but she cannot change what must be." Marcus turned to Rosemary, who was watching him with those unnaturally mature eyes. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you help me when you barely know me, when I was unkind to you?" "Because you needed help," Rosemary said simply, "and because—" She hesitated, looking down at her hands. "Because you reminded me of someone." "Who?" "I don't know. I just felt like I knew you somehow." Eleanor reached out and touched Rosemary's arm, speaking again in Spanish. The little girl's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "My abuela says I should tell you," Rosemary said, her voice trembling slightly, "about my mama and about my daddy." Marcus found himself leaning forward, suddenly desperate to hear whatever this child wanted to share. "My mama's name was Isabella Ramirez," Rosemary continued. "She worked as a cleaner in big offices in Manhattan. She was only 17 when I was born, and she never told me much about my daddy, except that he was a very important man who couldn't be with us." A chill ran down Marcus's spine, though he couldn't say why. "But sometimes, when she thought I was sleeping, I heard her crying and saying a name. She would look at an old newspaper picture she kept hidden in her jewelry box and whisper that name over and over." "What name?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. Rosemary looked directly into his eyes, and in that moment Marcus felt his carefully constructed world begin to crack. "She used to whisper Marcus." She would look at that picture and say, "Marcus, I'm sorry I couldn't tell you about our baby." The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of Elena's heart monitor. Marcus felt as if all the air had been sucked from his lungs. Isabella Ramirez. The name hit him like a physical blow. Dragging up memories he had buried so deep he had convinced himself they never existed. Isabella. Sweet, innocent Isabella, who had cleaned his office building 13 years ago, who had looked at him with such admiration, such hope, who had believed his lies about leaving his wife, about building a future together, who had disappeared one day, leaving only a note saying she couldn't burden him with her problems. He had been 29 then, already ruthless, but not yet completely heartless. Isabella had been a brief moment of genuine connection in his relentless climb to the top. When she vanished, he had been relieved. Her disappearance had saved him from having to end things himself, from having to explain to his society wife about his affair with a cleaning girl. He had never looked for her, never wondered what problems she couldn't burden him with, never considered that she might have been carrying his child. Marcus stared at Rosemary with new eyes, seeing things he had been blind to before. The shape of her face, the stubborn set of her jaw, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, all of it suddenly, painfully familiar. "Oh, God," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Isabella, what did I do?" The silence in the room stretched like a chasm, filled with 12 years of missed birthdays, lost bedtime stories, and a father's absence that had shaped a little girl's entire existence. Marcus felt as if he were drowning in the weight of his own failures, seeing his past with brutal clarity for the first time. Elena Martinez watched the recognition dawn on Marcus's face with the wisdom of someone who had lived through decades of human heartbreak. She had known, somehow, from the moment she saw him, the same eyes, the same stubborn chin, the same way of holding his shoulders when he was trying to be strong. "Isabella never stopped loving you," Eleanor said quietly, her voice cutting through Marcus's shocked silence. "Even when she was dying. Even when the cancer was eating her alive and she had no money for treatment, she never said an angry word about you." She's really gone?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer from Rosemary's earlier words. "6 months ago," Rosemary answered, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "She got sick, and we couldn't afford the doctors. By the time the charity hospital took her, it was too late." Marcus closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had lost. While he had been accumulating billions, building his empire of greed and ambition, his daughter had been growing up in poverty. Isabella had raised their child alone, working multiple jobs, struggling to survive, all while he lived in luxury just miles away. "She used to tell me stories about my daddy," Rosemary continued, her small hand still holding her grandmother's. "She said he was very smart and very successful, but that he lived in a different world from us. She said maybe someday, when I was older, she would try to find him. But she never did," Elena added, her breathing becoming more labored. "She was too proud, too afraid. She thought he would reject you both." The bitter irony wasn't lost on Marcus. Isabella had been right to be afraid. 13 years ago, if she had come to him with news of a pregnancy, he would have offered her money for an abortion and had security escort her from the building. He would have seen her as a problem to be solved, not a woman carrying his child. But now, looking at Rosemary, his daughter, he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades, genuine remorse. This beautiful, extraordinary child with her healing touch and her mature wisdom was his flesh and blood. She was the best part of himself that he had never known existed. "The picture," Marcus said suddenly. "The newspaper picture your mother kept. What was it?" Rosemary reached into her small backpack and pulled out a worn piece of newspaper. Folded and refolded so many times, it was beginning to tear along the creases. It was a business section article from 12 years ago, featuring a photo of Marcus at some corporate event. He was younger then, his face not yet hardened by years of ruthless ambition. "She cut this out when I was born," Rosemary said, handing him the fragile paper. "She used to show it to me and say, 'That's your daddy, Mija. He's very important, but maybe someday you'll meet him.'" Marcus stared at the photograph, seeing himself as Isabella must have seen him, successful, powerful, unreachable. He understood now why she had never tried to contact him. In her world of minimum-wage jobs and charity healthcare, he must have seemed like a figure from another planet. Eleanor suddenly gripped Rosemary's hand tighter, her breathing becoming more shallow. The machines around her bed began beeping more urgently. "Abuela," Rosemary said, alarm creeping into her voice. "It's time, mi amor," Elena whispered. "Time for me to go be with your mama." "No," Rosemary said, placing her hands on her grandmother's chest. "Let me help you. Let me make it better." But Elena shook her head weakly. "Some things cannot be healed, child. Some endings are meant to be." She looked at Marcus with eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "But some beginnings are gifts from God." As the medical team rushed in to respond to the alarms, Elena used the last of her strength to speak directly to Marcus. "Take care of her," she whispered. "She is all that's left of Isabella's love. Don't let her be alone." The old woman's eyes closed, and the steady beep of the heart monitor became a long, continuous tone. Elena Martinez had died as she had lived. thinking not of herself, but of the granddaughter she was leaving behind. Marcus watched as the medical team went through the motions of trying to revive her, knowing it was futile. Beside him, Rosemary wept silently, her small shoulders shaking with grief. Without thinking, Marcus reached out and pulled his daughter into his arms for the first time in her life. As she sobbed against his chest, Marcus made a silent promise to the memory of Isabella Ramirez and Elena Martinez. He would not fail this child again, whatever it took, however much he had to change. He would be the father Rosemary deserved. But first, he had to learn how to be human again. The funeral home on the Lower East Side was a world away from the gleaming towers of Manhattan where Marcus had built his empire. Small, cramped, and filled with the scent of wilted flowers and old wood. It was exactly the kind of place he would have sneered at just days before. Now, standing beside Rosemary as she said goodbye to the only family she had ever known, Marcus felt ashamed of every moment of privilege he had taken for granted. Elena Martinez's funeral was attended by perhaps 20 people. Neighbors from the tenement building where she had lived, fellow members of St. Anthony's Catholic Church, and a handful of women who had worked alongside Isabella in various cleaning jobs over the years. They were simple people who had known real hardship, and their genuine grief for Eleanor stood in stark contrast to the hollow corporate memorial services Marcus was accustomed to attending. Rosemary stood perfectly still throughout the service, her small hand clasped in Marcus's much larger one. She had barely spoken since her grandmother's death 2 days earlier, and Marcus found himself desperate to comfort her, but completely unsure how. His own childhood had been one of boarding schools and absent parents. He had no template for nurturing a grieving child. "She's with Mama now," Rosemary whispered as they lowered Elena's simple wooden casket into the ground. "They're both watching over me." "Yes," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotions he didn't fully understand. "They are." After the service, as the small crowd dispersed, Marcus found himself approached by Father Miguel, the elderly priest who had conducted the ceremony. The man's weathered face showed kindness tempered by decades of ministering to the poor and forgotten. "You're the father," Father Miguel said. It wasn't a question. Marcus nodded, still struggling to accept the reality himself. "I didn't know about any of it. Isabella never spoke of you directly, but she would light candles for Marcus every Sunday. She forgave you long ago for whatever pain you caused her." The priest studied Marcus with knowing eyes. "The question now is whether you can forgive yourself." "I don't deserve forgiveness," Marcus said honestly. "I abandoned them without even knowing I was abandoning them." "Perhaps. But that child needs you now. Elena made me promise to help if anything happened to her. But Rosemary doesn't need another guardian. She needs her father." As they walked back to Marcus's limousine, an obscene display of wealth in this neighborhood of broken dreams, Rosemary finally spoke again. "Where will I live now?" she asked, her voice so small it broke Marcus's heart. "With me," Marcus said without hesitation. "If you want to. I know I'm a stranger to you, and I know I can never make up for the years I missed, but—" He knelt down so they were eye to eye. "I want to try to be your father, Rosemary, if you'll let me." For the first time since Elena's death, Rosemary smiled. It was a tentative expression, fragile as spun glass, but it was hope. "Mama used to say that families aren't just about blood," she said quietly. "They're about choosing to love each other every day." "Then let's choose," Marcus said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. The drive back to Manhattan was filled with an awkward but not uncomfortable silence. Marcus found himself stealing glances at his daughter, still marveling at the miracle of her existence. She sat perfectly straight in the leather seat, her worn coat and second-hand dress looking absurdly out of place in the luxury vehicle. "Are you very rich?" Rosemary asked suddenly. The question caught Marcus off guard. Yes, very. Mama always said money doesn't make people happy. Your mother was a wise woman, Marcus replied, thinking of all the miserable wealthy people he knew. But it can make life easier, safer. Will you still be the same person if you have all that money? Rosemary asked with the directness that only children possess. It was perhaps the most important question anyone had ever asked him. And Marcus realized he didn't know the answer. Everything he had been, everything he had built his identity around, was tied to his wealth and power. Could he remain Marcus Blackwood the billionaire while learning to be Rosemary's father? I don't know, he admitted. I hope I can be better. Marcus's penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side was a monument to his success. 30,000 square feet of marble, crystal, and carefully curated art, worth more than most people would earn in several lifetimes. As he walked through the front door with Rosemary beside him, he saw it through her eyes and felt embarrassed by its cold opulence. "It's very big," Rosemary said diplomatically, her voice echoing in the cavernous foyer. "Too big," Marcus agreed. "I bought it because I could, not because I needed it." Mrs. Chen, his longtime housekeeper, appeared from the kitchen with her usual efficiency. She stopped short when she saw Rosemary, her professional composure flickering with surprise. "Mrs. Chen, this is Rosemary," Marcus said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar warmth. "She's my daughter, and she'll be living here now." If Mrs. Chen was shocked by this revelation, she hid it well. She had worked for Marcus for 8 years, maintaining his pristine lifestyle and asking no questions about his personal affairs. She had never seen him with a child, had never heard him mention family beyond the occasional bitter reference to his deceased parents. "Welcome home, Miss Rosemary," Mrs. Chen said with genuine kindness. "Are you hungry? I was just preparing dinner." Rosemary nodded shyly, and Marcus realized with a start that he had no idea what his daughter liked to eat, what her favorite foods were, whether she had any allergies. There were so many basic things about her life that he didn't know. "What's your favorite meal?" he asked as they followed Mrs. Chen toward the dining room. "Mama used to make rice and beans," Rosemary said wistfully, "with a little bit of chicken when we could afford it, and she made the best flan for my birthday." Mrs. Chen's expression softened further. "I make excellent rice and beans, and my flan recipe has won prizes." As they sat down to dinner at the massive dining table that usually seated only Marcus alone, he found himself watching Rosemary navigate the formal place setting with careful attention. She held her fork correctly, chewed with her mouth closed, and said please and thank you without being prompted. Isabella had raised her well, despite their poverty. "Tell me about school," Marcus said, realizing he didn't even know if she was enrolled anywhere. "I go to PS 184, Rosemary said. "Or I did, before Abuela got too sick. I've missed a lot of days lately." Marcus made a mental note to call his assistant first thing in the morning. Whatever school district issues existed, money could solve them. Rosemary would have the best education available. "Do you like to read?" he asked. "I love books." Rosemary's face lit up for the first time since entering his home. "Mama and I went to the library every Saturday. I've read all the Harry Potter books 3 times. "I have a library here," Marcus said. "Would you like to see it?" After dinner, he led her to his private study, a room lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound first editions he had purchased more for status than for reading. Rosemary moved through the space with reverence, running her fingers along the spines of books that cost more than her family's monthly rent had been. "Have you read all of these?" she asked in wonder. Marcus felt another stab of shame. "No, most of them are just for show, I'm afraid." "That's sad," Rosemary said with her characteristic honesty. "Books are meant to be read, not just looked at." She pulled a volume of poetry from the shelf, Langston Hughes, a book Marcus had owned for years but never opened. Mama used to read me poems before bed. She said they were like little gifts of beauty in a hard world. Would you? Would you like me to read to you tonight? Marcus asked hesitantly. Rosemary nodded, and they settled into the leather chairs by the fireplace. As Marcus read Dreams and The Negro Speaks of Rivers, he found himself experiencing literature for the first time not as a status symbol, but as a shared moment of connection with his daughter. When it was time for bed, they faced another awkward moment. Marcus had 7 bedrooms in the apartment, but none of them had been prepared for a child. Mrs. Chen had hastily made up the guest room, but it felt sterile and unwelcoming. "This is very nice," Rosemary said politely, though Marcus could see the loneliness in her eyes. "If you need anything during the night, my room is just down the hall," he said. "Don't hesitate to wake me." But as he was about to leave, Rosemary called out softly, "Marcus?" "Yes?" "Thank you for letting me stay and for reading to me." It felt like... She paused, searching for words. It felt like having a daddy. Marcus's throat tightened. "Good night, sweetheart." It was the first time he had ever used an endearment, and it felt both foreign and perfectly natural on his lips. The next few weeks passed in a blur of adjustments and revelations. Marcus threw himself into learning how to be a father with the same intensity he had once brought to hostile takeovers. He enrolled Rosemary in the exclusive Brearley School, hired tutors to help her catch up on missed coursework, and consulted child psychologists about how to help her process her grief. But despite all his efforts and resources, Marcus quickly discovered that parenting couldn't be solved with money alone. Rosemary was polite and grateful for everything he provided, but there remained a distance between them that no amount of expensive gifts could bridge. The breakthrough came on a Saturday morning 3 weeks after she had moved in. Marcus found Rosemary in the kitchen with Mrs. Chen, helping to prepare breakfast. She was laughing at something the housekeeper had said, and the sound was so beautiful that Marcus stopped in the doorway just to listen. "Good morning," he said, and immediately saw Rosemary's expression become more guarded, more formal. "Good morning, sir," she replied. "You don't have to call me sir," Marcus said gently. "Marcus is fine, or if you ever want to call me Dad, that would be okay too." Mrs. Chen busied herself at the stove, pretending not to listen to the awkward exchange. "Mrs. Chen was telling me about her granddaughter in California," Rosemary said, changing the subject. "She's teaching her to make dumplings over video calls." "That sounds nice," Marcus said, though he had no idea how to respond to such normal family conversation. After breakfast, as they sat in the living room reading, a routine they had established, Rosemary suddenly closed her book and looked at Marcus with those serious eyes. "Why are you trying so hard?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "All the expensive things, the fancy school, the tutors. Why are you doing all of that?" Marcus set down his own book, considering how to answer honestly. "Because I want to give you everything I couldn't give you before. Because I want to make up for lost time." "But you can't make up for lost time," Rosemary said with painful wisdom. "It's gone. And all those things, they're nice, but they're not what I need." "What do you need?" Marcus asked, genuinely wanting to understand. "I need to know that you want me here because I'm your daughter, not because you feel guilty about Mama." Rosemary's voice was steady, but Marcus could see the vulnerability behind her words. "I need to know that even when I make mistakes, even when I'm sad or angry or scared, you won't send me away." Marcus felt his chest tighten. Without thinking, he moved from his chair to the couch where Rosemary was sitting and pulled her into his arms. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "You are my daughter, my blood, my family, my heart. There is nothing you could do, nothing that could happen, that would make me send you away. Do you understand?" For the first time since they had been together, Rosemary truly relaxed in his embrace. "I understand," she whispered. And about making mistakes, Marcus continued. I'm going to make plenty of them as your father. I don't know what I'm doing most of the time, but I promise you this, I will never stop trying to learn. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, and Marcus marveled at how right it felt to hold his daughter. All his life he had equated love with possession, with acquisition. But this feeling was entirely different, a fierce protectiveness mixed with overwhelming tenderness. "Marcus," Rosemary said eventually. "Yes? Will you tell me about Mama? About when you knew her?" Marcus's first instinct was to deflect, to avoid the painful subject. But looking into Rosemary's hopeful face, he realized she deserved the truth, however unflattering it might be to him. "Your mother was the most genuine person I had ever met," he began slowly. "She worked as a cleaning lady in my office building, and she had this way of smiling that could light up the entire room. She was kind to everyone, the security guards, the maintenance staff, even the arrogant businessman who barely noticed her at first." "You," Rosemary said with a small smile. "Me," Marcus confirmed. "I was 29 and thought I was the most important person in the world. But Isabella saw through all of that. She saw something in me that I didn't even know existed. What happened? Why didn't you stay together?" Marcus closed his eyes, remembering that time with painful clarity. "I was married to someone else, a woman I had married for business reasons, not love. Isabella and I. What we had was wrong, but it felt more real than anything else in my life. I made promises I had no intention of keeping, told her lies about leaving my wife. And when she realized what kind of man I really was, she disappeared. She was protecting me," Rosemary said quietly. "She didn't want me to grow up around someone who would be ashamed of us." The accuracy of that assessment hit Marcus like a physical blow. 13 years ago, he would have been ashamed. He would have seen Rosemary as an inconvenience, a threat to his carefully constructed image. "She was right to protect you," he admitted. "I wasn't ready to be anyone's father then. I was too selfish, too cruel. But you're ready now." Marcus looked at his daughter, this miraculous child who had healed him in more ways than she could possibly know. "I'm learning to be ready. Every day, I'm learning." 2 months after Rosemary came to live with him, Marcus faced his first real test as a father. He came home from work to find Mrs. Chen waiting for him with a worried expression. "Mr. Blackwood, we have a situation," she said carefully. "Rosemary is in her room and she's quite upset." "What happened?" "There was an incident at school today. She used her abilities on another student." Marcus felt his blood run cold. They had talked about Rosemary's gift in general terms, but she had promised to be careful about using it around others. He found her curled up on her bed, still wearing her school uniform, her face streaked with tears. "Rosemary," he sat on the edge of the bed. "What happened, sweetheart?" "I'm in trouble," she said miserably. "They want to expel me. Tell me everything." Through broken sobs, the story emerged. During recess, a classmate named Emma had fallen from the monkey bars and broken her arm. The bone was clearly displaced, and Emma was screaming in agony while they waited for the ambulance. Without thinking, Rosemary had knelt beside her and placed her hands on the injury. "The bone just fixed itself," Rosemary said. "Right in front of everyone." Emma stopped crying, and her arm was perfect again. But all the other kids saw it happen. Marcus's mind raced. He could imagine the chaos that must have followed. Children talking to their parents, teachers trying to explain the unexplainable, school administrators facing a situation far beyond their training. "The principal called it a disruptive incident," Rosemary continued. "She said I was playing dangerous pranks and that I needed psychological evaluation before I could return to school." "You were trying to help," Marcus said gently. "That's not wrong, Rosemary. But now everyone thinks I'm a freak." Emma's parents are saying I did something to hurt her first, then pretended to fix it. They want to sue us." Marcus felt the familiar surge of protective anger that had become second nature since Rosemarie entered his life. "Let me handle the school and the parents. You don't need to worry about any of that. But what if they're right? What if there's something wrong with me?" Marcus pulled his daughter into his arms, holding her tightly. "There is nothing wrong with you, Rosemarie. You have a gift that most people don't understand, but that doesn't make you wrong or strange or bad. It makes you special. Mama used to say that too," Rosemarie sniffled. "But maybe she was just trying to make me feel better. Your mother was right, and so am I." Marcus pulled back so he could look into her eyes. "Do you know what I was doing at your age? I was learning how to manipulate people, how to take advantage of others for my own benefit. You're learning how to heal people, how to ease their pain. Which one of us sounds like the better person?" That evening, after Rosemarie had gone to bed, Marcus made a series of phone calls. By morning, he had spoken with the school board president, Emma's parents, and the family's attorney. Money changed hands, not bribes, but generous donations to the school's scholarship fund and a settlement that would pay for Emma's college education. The incident was officially classified as a misunderstanding, and Rosemarie was quietly transferred to a different private school where the staff had been carefully briefed about her unique needs. But the episode had shaken Marcus more than he cared to admit. For the first time, he truly understood the burden his daughter carried. Her gift was miraculous, but it also made her different in a world that often punished difference. How could he protect her while still allowing her to help others? The answer came to him gradually over the following weeks. If Rosemarie couldn't use her abilities openly, perhaps they could find ways to help people more discreetly. Marcus began researching medical charities, hospitals that served the poor, places where an anonymous benefactor might arrange for certain patients to receive visits from a volunteer who specialized in providing comfort to the sick. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. And as Marcus watched his daughter's spirits lift at the prospect of being able to help others again, he realized that in trying to protect her gift, he was also learning to nurture his own capacity for goodness. The man he had been before Rosemarie would never have understood that true power came not from taking, but from giving. Not from accumulating wealth, but from using that wealth to serve others. His daughter wasn't just healing bodies, she was healing souls, starting with his own. But as winter melted into spring, Marcus began to notice troubling changes in Rosemarie that would soon test everything they had built together. Spring brought subtle changes that Marcus almost missed at first. Rosemarie seemed more tired than usual, requiring longer naps and going to bed earlier. Her appetite decreased, and she would sometimes pause mid-sentence, as if gathering strength to continue speaking. Mrs. Chen noticed it too, mentioning her concerns to Marcus with characteristic directness. "The child is fading," she said one evening, as they watched Rosemarie struggle to stay awake during their reading time. "Something is taking her energy." Marcus's first instinct was to call doctors, to demand examinations and tests. But when he broached the subject with Rosemarie, she smiled sadly and shook her head. "I'm not sick like you were," she said gently. "This is different." "Then what's wrong? Help me understand." Rosemarie was quiet for a long moment, curled up beside him on the couch with a book she was too exhausted to read. "Remember when I told you that God decides when it's time? That some endings are meant to be?" A chill ran down Marcus's spine. "What are you saying?" "The gift doesn't come from nowhere," Rosemarie explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I heal someone, I take their sickness into myself. Not the disease exactly, but the essence of it, the pain, the wrongness. It lives in me for a while before it goes away." Marcus felt the world tilt around him. You mean every time you've healed someone, you've been making yourself sick? Just temporarily, Rosemary said quickly, seeing his panic. Usually it goes away after a few days or weeks, but lately... She paused, struggling to explain something she didn't fully understand herself. It's not going away as fast, and there's been so much of it. Marcus thought about all the people they had helped over the past few months. The homeless man with pneumonia they had encountered outside the church, the little girl with leukemia in the pediatric ward of Mount Sinai, the elderly woman with Alzheimer's they had visited at the nursing home. Each time Rosemary had insisted on helping. And each time Marcus had been so proud of her compassion that he hadn't considered the cost. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Because you would have tried to stop me," Rosemary said simply. "And I can't stop helping people, Marcus. It's who I am. It's why I was given this gift." "But if it's killing you—" "It's not killing me," Rosemary interrupted, though her voice lacked conviction. "It's just making me tired." That night, Marcus lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with possibilities. If conventional medicine couldn't help Rosemary, maybe there were other options. Alternative healers, spiritual advisors, someone who might understand gifts like hers. He had connections all over the world, resources that could open any door. But when he began making inquiries the next morning, he discovered that finding help for someone with Rosemary's abilities was more complicated than he had imagined. Most of the people he contacted either dismissed his story as fantasy or tried to exploit the situation for their own gain. The few who seemed legitimate were either charlatans or so far removed from scientific reality that Marcus couldn't bring himself to trust them. It was Father Miguel who finally provided a lead. When Marcus called the elderly priest in desperation, the man listened quietly to his concerns before speaking. "There is someone," Father Miguel said carefully. "A woman in New Mexico who works with children who have unusual gifts. She's helped families before when conventional medicine couldn't. Her name is Dr. Sarah Windhorse. Dr. Windhorse turned out to be a licensed pediatrician who had spent decades studying the intersection of medicine and what she called energetic healing. When Marcus reached her by phone, she listened to his description of Rosemary's condition without skepticism or judgment. "What your daughter is experiencing is not uncommon among natural healers," Dr. Windhorse explained. "The gift often comes with a cost, especially for those who use it frequently, but there are ways to manage it, to help her learn protective techniques." "Can you help her?" "I can try, but I would need to meet with her in person, and it would require her cooperation. She would need to want to learn how to protect herself." That evening, Marcus sat down with Rosemary to discuss the possibility of traveling to New Mexico. To his surprise, she was reluctant. "What if she tries to take my gift away?" Rosemary asked. "What if she makes it so I can't help people anymore?" "Is that what you're afraid of?" "I'm afraid of becoming ordinary," Rosemary admitted. "The gift is the only special thing about me. Without it, I'm just a regular girl whose mama died, and whose daddy didn't want her." Marcus felt his heart break. "Rosemary, look at me." He waited until she met his eyes. "You are not special because of your gift. Your gift is special because of who you are. You have the kindest heart, the strongest spirit, and the most beautiful soul I have ever encountered. That has nothing to do with healing people and everything to do with being you." "But I didn't fall in love with your abilities," Marcus continued. "I fell in love with my daughter. The girl who reads poetry, who makes Mrs. Chen laugh, who taught me that families are about choosing to love each other every day. That girl is worth more than any gift, no matter how miraculous." Tears streamed down Rosemary's face, but she was smiling. "You really mean that? I have never meant anything more in my entire life." The next morning, they boarded Marcus's private jet for Albuquerque, carrying with them hope for healing and the unshakable bond that had grown between a billionaire learning to be human and a little girl learning to be a daughter. Dr. Sarah Windhorse's clinic was a modest adobe building set against the stunning backdrop of the Sandia Mountains. As their car wound through the high desert landscape, Marcus found himself thinking about how different this place was from the sterile medical facilities where he had spent his own recent crisis. Everything here seemed infused with a sense of peace and timeless wisdom. Dr. Windhorse herself was a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes that seemed to see everything. She greeted them personally, embracing Rosemary like an old friend, despite having just met her. "I can feel it," she said simply, her hand resting gently on Rosemary's shoulder. "The weight you're carrying. It's heavier than any 12-year-old should bear." Over the next 3 days, Dr. Windhorse worked with Rosemary, using techniques that combined traditional medicine with practices Marcus didn't fully understand, but couldn't deny were effective. Meditation, energy work, herbal remedies that seemed to actually strengthen his daughter rather than just treat her symptoms. But the most important work happened in the conversations between Dr. Windhorse and Rosemary. The doctor helped her understand that her gift was meant to be used wisely, not indiscriminately, that healing others was important, but sacrificing herself in the process served no one in the long run. A healer who burns herself out cannot help anyone, Dr. Windhorse explained as they sat together in her garden on the final evening. "Your gift is like a well. You must let it refill between uses, or it will run dry." "Nah, but what if someone really needs help and I'm not strong enough?" Rosemary asked. "Then you do what you can and trust that others will do their part too. Healing is not a burden you must carry alone, child. It's a gift you share with the world." On their last morning in New Mexico, Dr. Windhorse pulled Marcus aside for a private conversation. "Your daughter will be fine," she assured him. "The techniques I've taught her will help her manage the energy drain. But there's something else you need to understand." "What?" "Rosemary's gift isn't just about healing bodies. It's about healing hearts, spirits, souls. She healed yours, didn't she?" Marcus nodded, thinking about the man he had been before his daughter entered his life. "That's the most important work she does," Dr. Windhorse continued. "And it's work that will shape not just her life, but yours. You have a responsibility now, not just as her father, but as someone who has been touched by genuine healing." "What kind of responsibility?" "To use what you've learned, to help others the way she helped you. Your resources, your influence, your voice. They're all tools for healing too, if you choose to use them that way." As they flew back to New York, Marcus reflected on Dr. Windhorse's words. Over the past few months, his priorities had already begun shifting. He was spending less time focused on accumulating wealth and more time thinking about how to use what he had to make a difference. The Rosemary Foundation, which he had established to provide medical care for underprivileged children, was just the beginning. "Marcus?" Rosemary's voice interrupted his thoughts. She was looking much stronger already. The techniques Dr. Windhorse had taught her providing relief from the energy drain that had been slowly sapping her strength. "Yes, sweetheart. When we get home, can we visit the children's hospital? I want to help, but I want to do it the right way this time." Marcus smiled, marveling at his daughter's persistent compassion despite everything she had been through. "Of course, but we'll go slowly, and you'll use the protection techniques Dr. Windhorse taught you. And you'll be there with me every step of the way." As Manhattan's skyline came into view, Marcus realized that the man who had left the city a few days ago was not the same one returning. He had departed as Marcus Blackwood the billionaire, focused on his daughter's problem. He was returning as Marcus Blackwood the father, committed to being part of the solution. That evening, as they sat together in his study, reading, Rosemary with renewed energy, Marcus with newfound purpose, she looked up at him with those serious eyes that had first captured his heart. "Are you happy?" she asked. It was such a simple question, but it hit Marcus with unexpected force. When was the last time anyone had asked him about his happiness? When was the last time he had even considered it? "Yes," he said, and realized with surprise that it was true. "I'm happier than I've ever been in my life. Even though everything changed, even though you're not the same person you used to be." Marcus set down his book and really looked at his daughter, this miraculous child who had walked into his life and transformed everything she touched. "Especially because of that," he said. "The person I used to be was successful, but he was also empty, lonely, angry. I never want to be that man again." "Good," Rosemary said with satisfaction, "because I like you much better this way." As they returned to their reading, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he would never have believed that the meaning of his life would come not from what he acquired, but from what he gave away, not from the power he wielded, but from the love he shared. His daughter had healed him in every way that mattered, and now, together, they would spend the rest of their lives healing others, not just with miraculous gifts, but with the simple revolutionary act of choosing compassion over cruelty, love over indifference, connection over isolation. The billionaire and the little girl with healing hands had found each other across an impossible divide, and in doing so, they had discovered that the greatest fortune of all was family, and the most powerful magic was love. Outside their window, snow began to fall again over Manhattan, covering the city in the same pristine white that had blanketed Central Park on the day they first met. But this time, Marcus noticed the beauty. This time, he was grateful for the gift of witnessing something pure and perfect. This time, he was finally, truly alive. This powerful tale reminds us that true wealth cannot be measured in dollars, but in the depth of our connections and the compassion we show others. Marcus Blackwood's transformation from a ruthless billionaire to a loving father illustrates that it's never too late to change, to choose love over greed, and to find meaning beyond material success. Rosemary's extraordinary gift serves as a metaphor for the healing power we all possess when we choose to help rather than harm, to give rather than take. The story reveals that the greatest miracles often come disguised as ordinary moments. A child's forgiveness, a father's awakening, the choice to see beyond our own pain to help others heal theirs. It shows us that family isn't defined by blood alone, but by the daily decision to love, protect, and nurture each other through life's challenges. Perhaps most importantly, this journey teaches us that healing works both ways. While Rosemary healed Marcus's body, he healed her heart by becoming the father she had always needed. Their story proves that redemption is possible for anyone willing to open their heart, that love can transform even the most hardened soul, and that the greatest legacy we can leave is not what we accumulate, but how we choose to love and serve others. In the end, both father and daughter discovered that true power lies not in what we can take from the world, but in what we can give back to it.